bringing California ways to Washington. I feel like that the Californians are sort of waking up to this reality. Unfortunately, they have to do it. It seems like they have to do it the hard way, with the wildfires being Exhibit A in Los Angeles. We had these wildfires going on since 2017, year after year after year, but it hit a major lucrative area of California, one of the most lucrative. And guess what? Now everybody's paying attention. So we have a Karen Bass recall for the mayor of Los Angeles. That's going on right now. There's another recall of Gavin Newsom taking place. But I don't put much money. I don't want to put my money on that one, since he's survived so many, and he's out into 2026 anyway. That's why he's looking for a landing pad. But you're seeing some signs of sort of a shift to the right, both in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. So Los Angeles threw out George Gascon, their district attorney, in November. That was after San Francisco threw out both Chesa Boudin in a root call, their district attorney, and their mayor, London Breed, because they're fed up. People in California are absolutely fed up with the crime, the homelessness, the drug deaths, and now the wildfires. It's just a perfect storm to have the voters in California reevaluate where they're getting their information, and of the gross mismanagement taking place at the top. So I really think there's a shift. Whether it will be enough in this next election for Kamala Harris not to win, I'm highly doubtful, because the state is basically 2/3 Democrats. People like to say there's a D after their name. They just vote for it. They're not even really educated voters in terms of how these terrible policies are impacting their bottom lines, their household budgets.
Jed, what are your thoughts? How do you clean up California? You've studied corruption for a long time. Is there any hope?
Well, you know, it's a big problem. Last year, the New York Times reported 576 public officials in California were charged with some type of public corruption charges, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. But I think the big problem is how involved the politicians are with this. I mean, Gavin Newsom himself, he hired or appointed more than 20 people, who were later found guilty of major crimes and ethical violations. Crimes like murder, arms trafficking, things like this. And if politicians continue to do business with these stuff.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jed, but just how casually you said that. The governor of California, holding people, arms trafficking, murder. That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, those are just crimes. Those are felonies. Yeah. Like, those are, murder's a tough one.
Right. Well, and he also took money from, these same individuals. So it's, organized crime, and that's where it also spreads to other states. It's organized crime that's kind of centralized in California. It kind of spreads to other states because there's so much money and resources there for it to spread.
What I heard Jed saying is if what you want to say is happening in California is criminal, because it was this beautiful state and now it's become this like failed state. It is criminal, but it's not just because of the failed leftist policies. It's because maybe in part of the criminals that its leaders do business with and have appointed to key positions, and that's one of the takeaways from the book.
Absolutely. Well, it's a terrific book, guys. I applaud you for doing it. We know how much hard work it is to get this material together. There are a lot of books out there these days. I've written a few myself. Eric's written one. A lot of people write books, and they're what I call Google books, right? They just kind of do some basic research, they throw something together. That is not fool's gold. You break a lot of news in this book. Congratulations. The book is out today. I would encourage everybody to pick up a copy. Eric, your final thoughts on this topic.
That you're such a better person than me, and so humble, because Peter's gone through this entire interview and not mentioned the fact that his name was also on the cover because he wrote the book.
Well, I did write
and I'm not saying that's the best part of the book, but I'm saying that it is. But Peter Schweitzer gives literally his full throat endorsement, as do we. We're very proud of it. We've helped because of Jed and Susan. We're big fans of them, their work, and I do think that you will learn things about California. Those lefty relatives that you have that live in California is an excellent gift for them. Send it to them. You send it to them, and then a bus ticket. anywhere else. Come on, anywhere else, guys. Any other state's gonna be better than California.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, we appreciate you, the audience, for listening. As always, we know your time is valuable. You can find out more about the work we do at thedrilldown.com. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast wherever great podcasts are located. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. As a business owner, you take on a lot of roles. Marketer, bookkeeper, CEO. When it comes to small business insurance, Progressive has you covered. They offer discounts on commercial auto insurance, customizable coverages that can grow with your business, and reliable protection for whatever comes your way. Count on Progressive to handle your insurance while you do, well, everything else. Quote today in as little as 7 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
When they were standing in front of him or within eyeshot, the demons were struck with a terror because there was something holy within Padre Pio, and so they would begin a manifestation. So Padre Pio might come and walk in front of that person and trace the sign of the cross, and they would be delivered. And I say might because sometimes he didn't have to do that. He could just pray from a distance, and for all intents and purposes, it looked like, holy cow, like, you know, Mrs. Shephouse just fell on her back and started writhing. She clearly has a demon. Padre Pio turned his head towards her and looked at her for maybe half a second and then just walked away as if nothing was happening. Like, why did he ignore her? And then all of a sudden she gets up and she's perfectly fine. In other words, he didn't have to do anything with her. That the conversation, the dialogue between he and God and he and the devil was of such an astounding nature. That was enough to liberate Mrs. Shiphouse.
Welcome back to The Exorcist Files, the feel-good spiritual warfare podcast of the season. I'm your co-host Ryan Buffet with your weekly intro and announcements. First, the best news. New case files are coming soon. As promised, we have a few more case files for you, dramatized into 3D audio for your listening enjoyment and edification. These should drop in about a month or so stay tuned, tell your friends, and well, we think you're really going to love them. Secondly, we want to honor one of our partners, the Echo Prayer app. You all know we love prayer on this show. In fact, whenever Father Martins or any of the exorcists are asked about the best ways to keep evil away, they always say, you must pray. I personally have seen how prayers changed my own life, and honestly, how many times have you told someone, I'm praying for you, and then you forget, you don't. This is an app that reminds you to pray. It lets you make prayer lists, and honestly, it's really easy to use. And it's free. That's Echo Prayer app. You can check it out where you get your apps in the app stores, or go to echoprayer.com. That's echoprayer.com. Lastly, as I've shared, on this show, producing it has been a really fun challenge to my theology, and the experience has really forced me to think deeply about a lot of issues that I honestly hadn't before. This is true for other members of our team as well. So with that, we will be in the future releasing some bonus content with me interviewing other members of the X-Files team, theologians, friends of the show, just to react and share their own experiences with it. So stay tuned for that. You can click in the show notes to find that. Okay, with that, today we bring you the life and times of one very special Padre, and that is Padre Pio, here to help us bilocate into the beauty of the mystery of this most famous saint is our very own special Padre, Father Carlos Martins. Welcome back to The Exorcist Files, where we are here with the Padre talking about another important Padre. Father Martins is here to discuss the one and the only Padre Pio. Father Martins, how are we doing, sir?
Yeah, we're great, Ryan. Good to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, I know this was a very requested episode, and obviously I have less exposure to the saints, but I think I've heard Padre Pio is the favorite of more of my Catholic friends than almost anyone. Is that a normal result from a sample size? Is Padre Pio like one of the most popular saints of all time?
And it's that for a number of reasons. Within Padre Pio, there was a tremendous incarnation of gifts. God really endowed him with confessional. Now, Padre Pio doesn't know who he is because there's a screen in the way, and that's the point of confession, is to make it anonymous, to make it inviting for people to go and disclose their sins, because your personal identity really doesn't matter. It doesn't factor into any of this, just the fact that you want to reconcile with God. So your identity to the priest is irrelevant for the sacrament of confession. And so he gets down and kneels in that confessional, and Padre Pio says to him, "What are you doing here, you donkey? You worthless dog. You don't want communion with God. You don't want reconciliation with Christ. You do this, 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 and this with impunity. You don't intend to reconcile with God, right? Get out of here before I throw you out. Get out of my confession." Now he's screaming this, Padre Pio is, at the top of his lungs. And this church in San Giovanni Rotondo is not a large church. There's not a single human being in that church who is not hearing this transpire between them. Get out before I throw you out. And so he gets up and he's mortified and just a rage with anger. And he just leaves from that place just furious. And he spends all night awake, and he's just seeing red. And the next day, he decides to go back and give Padre Pio a piece of his mind. Goes up at the church again, and this time, he doesn't stand in line. He walks right to the front of the line. He waits for the penitent who's inside the confessional to come out, and he just jumps right in. And Padre Pio turns to him and says, "Good. I was afraid you weren't going to come back. Now make your confession and get right." And so, in that narrative, that wasn't part of his script. So he's just taken aback by this. But he's confronted with this gentle priest now, inviting him. Now all of that is behind us. If you want to make your peace with God, and obviously he was convinced, because Padre Pio didn't know him from a hole in the ground, and yet he knew exactly who he was. Right? There's no way, and on a physical level, that he could have known that he was coming to his confession, but yet he did. And now he knew he was back, and he's inviting him now. Okay, this is the time to get right with God. And so that was the beginning of an absolutely dramatic conversion for him, and it changed his life. And in fact, that man led the effort of the Italian Catholics in Jamaica, Queens, New York, to fundraise and build the church that now stands in Pietrelcina in Honduras. A magnificent church. And it was all begun by that penitent. So with his friends, I've been to their house numerous times, and one of my best friends in the world, family has become. And so these are people that knew him. Now, the incident was with his grandfather, but even Michael himself, the grandson, remembers he received his first communion from when he received his confirmation. And in fact, when his mother was pregnant, his mother received a healing. She was advised to have an abortion because of where the baby was, so she needed a surgery in utero. And so the whole family prayed, and the surgeon, who was a Jew, began then the surgery, and he held up the scalpel to make the incision on her. And then what he said, he described this with my hand, it's like something invisible grabbed me and moved the position, and I found myself making the incision in a spot where I did not want to make the incision. But I did it. And that was the key to saving the baby. And so I have a friend today alive in New York because of it. Now, when she went to Padre Pio to thank him, all she did was, in her prayers, request his intervention. In other words, he didn't know the full effect of it. He just knew that there was a problem, the baby's in jeopardy. When she went back to thank him, he smacked her in the head and said, "You considered an abortion."
Why do you
And which was true. She hadn't told him, but he knew. God had planted that knowledge in him. And so he said, "You need to repent and get your life right with God." And he walked away. So within Padre Pio, was the reminder writ large that God sees everything. You can't hide your life from God.
Listen, do you hear the sizzle? Okay, you probably don't, because I'm not cooking right now. But if I was, you would hear it because it's olive oil on Graza. We all know olive oil is great for you, and Graza is the best way to get it. It's sent straight to your door, it's fresh, it's never blended, and it comes from a single type of olive, the gall, straight out of high-end Spain, where over half the world's olive oil is produced. Single origin is good. It means no mystery blends. So Graza comes in super fun squeeze and spray bottles. There's no more messy tins or drippy spouts. You just aim, squeeze, and go. They make 3 types of olive oil. Frizzle, their newest, with a higher 490 degree Fahrenheit smoke point. It's perfect for frying, crisping, or grilling. They've got Sizzle, which at 410 degrees is a great everyday cooking oil for roasting, marinating, and sauteing. And then, of course, my personal favorite, the Drizzle, a bold, punchy finishing oil you can sprinkle on salads, dip bread in, or even top off on ice cream. Yes, I said that, ice cream. Look, I'm obsessed with health, and particularly brain and heart health. I've been really encouraged by the science surrounding the compounds in olive oil that are supportive of health. So I'm trying to get as much olive oil in my diet as I can. Graza oil is loaded with tons of heart and brain-friendly nutrients. Okay, so you're probably ready to get some olive oil now, right? Well, X-Files listeners get 10% off their first order. So head to graza.co and use code XFiles, that's X-Files, to get 10% off the trio, which includes Sizzle, Frizzle, and Drizzle, and get to cooking your next chef-quality meal. That's graza.co. Wow. All right. Well, we knew there'd be no shortage of Padre Pio stories, so we'll get into some more. But give us the kind of concise little history corner of who was Padre Pio, when was he around, and perhaps even more importantly, why are we talking about him today? What makes him so significant and so popular?
Yeah, so Padre Pio was born as Francesco Forgione, the son of a poor farmer in Pietrelcina, Italy. Pietrelcina is a farming town in the southern Italian region near Campania. He was born in 1887, died in 1968, so he died at 81 years old. So obscure boy from an obscure family in an obscure town at a time when almost everybody in Italy was born that way. And so he felt a call as an adolescent, as a very young child, to the religious life. And he joined the Capuchins, which is an order of Franciscans that take the call to poverty very serious. So Francis's genius, his religious genius, was in embracing a call and calling for an embracing of poverty. And within that poverty, within that repudiation of all forms of luxury, that there is a tremendous freedom, that one's love of God is able to exist and to be lived in an unhindered way when it is not encumbered by the goods of the earth. And so the Franciscans lived that to an absolutely strict way. So, for example, they don't wear shoes and mostly wear sandals. They eat very simply, very poorly. In their rooms, very sparsely decorated. They have basically the bare essentials, and that's it. And obviously, as Franciscans, they own nothing. Everything is held in common, and so there's no personal possession of any one of the brothers and friars. He was ordained a priest in 1910, and he had already been a Capuchin for at least 7 years by that point. And he was assigned to the monastery at San Giovanni Rotondo, which is a small, poor town in southern Italy on the eastern side, so on the Adriatic side of Italy, only maybe 5 miles maximum, less than 10 kilometers from the coast, from the water. And save for 2 periods of military conscription where he had to be part of the First World War as part of the Italian Army's medical corps, save for those 2 brief periods, he lived at San Giovanni Rotondo for the rest of his life. And then in 1918, something extraordinary happened, was an event called the transfiguration of the heart of Padre Pio. So it was a kind of transfiguration where God came to him in a mystical way. And it was marked and characterized by the stigmata, by the wounds of the crucifixion of Christ, which at first were invisible and then eventually became visible. So he had the mark of the nails in the hands, in his side, and I've seen the nightshirt that he was wearing. So I guess the best way to describe it would be a tunic, a simple white cloth tunic that would be worn like a t-shirt, the bottom of which goes down to one's ankles. So I saw the thing, and in addition to the stigmata that I've just described, there was the mark of the scourging on his back. Like, you could see open wounds and you could see scabs that remain on this cloth to this day. That began a period of mystical transformation where the crucified and suffering Christ became incarnate, if you will, within Padre Pio, or maybe even better stated, that Padre Pio, in a sense, became present within the incarnate crucified Christ. And there was a mystical sharing of the suffering of the crucifixion, which remained with him throughout his entire life until a few days before his death, where it just mystically disappeared. And all the wounds, all the scars disappeared as well. But for most of his life, Padre Pio bore these wounds on his body, could perform the miraculous, and did so, and these miraculous events rolled off of him daily. People would come to him with petitions, and he would pray, and sometimes he prayed in advance, like he would be given an illumination as to who was going to come.
Okay, Twucky, here we go again.
Right to a visa. No one has a right to a green card. The U.S. has a right to deny that for virtually any reason, notably a supporter of Hamas.
And what was going to be asked of him? Sometimes it was on the spot. And I'm sure that there were some people that weren't healed, that didn't get what they want. But an absolutely astounding amount would present their petition, and then he replies, don't worry, everything is going to be fine. Or, you know what, go down the street, there's the Church of Our Lady of Graces there, go to the altar on the left side, to the left altar, and there make a prayer and make an offering, a financial offering to the poor, and then God will grant your miracle. And sure enough, there was just a plethora of people that would come back and report that they received exactly what they wanted, and in many cases even more than that, even more than what they were requesting. So Padre Pio was somebody in whom the mystery of God was writ large, and people were able to encounter that every day.
All right, Father, before we move on, because we did touch on the stigmata and some of the stuff that the Franciscans adhere to, which I did want to ask quickly, what is the motivation for those of us outside maybe church history and outside understanding of the Franciscan order? What would be the motivation to not wear shoes or sandals? And when you kind of get into these, vows of poverty, etc., what is the intent behind that, and why do some religious orders practice that?
Well, yeah, and most religious orders practice that. The reason for that is to clear what is unimportant out of your life, so it does not become a distraction for what is important. And what is important boils down to two things. One is to love God with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your soul. And the second is to do what God desires. And so if your interests, if your attention are divided between those two things and something else, then those two things suffer as a result of it. So get rid of everything else, and then you've got nothing left on your plate but that which is important. And so that's what the embracing of poverty does, right? So that you are not owned by your things. And the way to not be owned by your things is to own nothing.
Jesus wore sandals, right? So I guess, not to be facetious, but the whole no shoes thing, I guess, is a bit, is there any, it's not hinting that the pain or discomfort of the shoes is helpful. Is there, I guess, what's the line between too much asceticism and like willful kind of pain to bring about formation, self-flagellation kind of thing, I guess? Is there any trace of that, or what's, I guess, just help me understand why, if Jesus wore shoes, why an order might say no shoes?
Well, I don't know that Jesus wore shoes. He wore what was common for the day. But if you're looking at, did Jesus Christ embrace poverty? I mean, we're talking about God Almighty, who incarnated himself as a human being. No one embraced poverty more than Jesus Christ. He could have been wearing the finest things that the world has to offer, and he still So Christ himself is, I think, the best example of that. The point of the vow of poverty is to free yourself from the distraction that goods can give. Right? So I remember, for example, there was a friend of my father's. He did almost no maintenance in his house. So, I mean, he needed a walkway driveway to his house. He didn't have it. Every time it rained, he got money, which means he got money when he was doing the walk, and everybody else did when they were doing the walk. everybody told him, look, why don't we just pour a sidewalk on some interlock stone? And his response was, if I do that, then I have to take care of it. If I don't have it, I don't have to take care of it. Now, that's an example, and maybe it's an extreme example. Look, it was something that the guy needed. But he was aware that when I have something, it's going to demand my attention and my labor. If I don't have it, then it won't. And that principle there is what is at play in religious orders that embrace poverty, and frankly, for individuals who do. You don't have to be a member of a religious order to live a kind of poverty of spirit and to live a life of radicals.
Got it. And I guess this ties into the next thing you mentioned about the stigmata. So this concept of the stigmata, was this something that we know obviously is connected right with Christ's wounds, but have there been other saints who'd experienced this, or was this coming into conversation with Padre Pio? And then what would you imagine is the point of the manifestation of stigmata? Or someone saying, wow, that just looks like arbitrary pain inserted on him for someone who's out there doing full-time ministry. Walk us through kind of the significance of the stigmata.
Yeah, so Padre Pio was not the first person in history to receive the stigmata. The first recorded case was 1,000 years before him, and it was the case of St. Francis of Assisi. So he is the first recorded case, but there were others in the intervening years. One of those, for example, was St. Rita of Cascia, who received the stigmata of just one single wound from the crown of thorns on her forehead. And it would bleed as if there was a thorn poking her. And there were times where people actually saw a thorn within the hole. St. Catherine of Siena was another one. And there have been many mystics, some of them known, some of them unknown, that have shared these wounds. And it is a way in the authentic cases where Christ has decided to have this particular soul, for whatever reason, for his own sovereign reason, to share with him in that experience, to keep him company in that experience of suffering that Christ did. And those souls that are shared that grace are usually gifted with a tremendous amount of grace to share the suffering, which is not insignificant. Now, Padre Pio had open wounds on his hands, had an open wound on his side. When I say an open wound, I have a bandaging that closed his side, and the bandaging were changed every day. And when it was pulled off of him, it had scab. So I have like a giant scab that came from his wound. Like it would be exactly what you would imagine it would be. The wadding of a thick bandage that closed somebody's side where there was a great big gash. And then at the end of the day, it's pulled off, and a new one is pulled on, and all of this stuff was saved because of the reputation he had for holiness and the mystical phenomena that was around. People knew that they were dealing with a saint, his own order. So every day he was assigned a pair of gloves, for example, and that's why there's an extraordinary amount of Padre Pio gloves today. So my reality in New York, he has one. Padre Pio's been gifted with one. And it's a brown glove, but if you look at it, there's no question there's a great big bloody scab in the palm area of that glove. And so, why does God give it? Ultimately, only God knows. But when he gives an extraordinary grace like this, sharing the suffering, it's because he has found a soul that he desires to keep him company in an extraordinary way. Hey friends, Father Martin's here. Because of my schedule, I don't myself get to listen to a lot of podcasts, but I was recently made aware of a new one called Conceiving Crime. And they gave me an early access to their work. The podcast showcases stories, past and present, that explore how human beings abuse one of the most precious gifts we've been given, the ability to create life. I'll be honest, it's not a feel-good show, but it covers a really important issue for our time and one that is really near and dear to my heart, human life. It's not a lighthearted topic that is explored on the podcast, but the discussion is very needed, and the show is very well done and produced. If you like true crime, I think you'll get a lot out of it, as it features different stories each episode. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. Again, it's called Conceiving Crime. Give it a listen. I think you'll find it enlightening